Papali ni John Wesley. Ako sumara. Malu ko bibali mo. Alak may ko na tour guide. Okay. Mabali John Wesley. Alum ni bali ni John Wesley ko. Yeah.
And you're from where?
I'm from Deptford area.
Right, so the house here was built at the same time as the chapel.
Yeah.
So that's 1778, 40 years after John Wesley began his ministry. We begin the tour here in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And this is where the housekeeper would have prepared the food. In the house there would have been a housekeeper and a servant. And they would have lived on the top floor of the house with their families. So it would have been rather crowded up there, but that's where they lived. The food would have been cooked on an open fire here, and there would have been a spit going across where the meat would have been cooked, and that would have been turned. And there hanging down is a device which was used for turning the meat on the spit. It's clockwork, and you wind it up, and when you start it, it goes round and round, and by a cog it will turn the spit. Now you notice that even though this is a kitchen, there's no water in here.
Yeah.
And for a long time we wondered where they got water from. We thought it might have been come by horse and cart, which was quite common in those days in the city of London. But a few years ago, one of our education workers was looking at some old plans, and she saw that there was a well outside here. It's not there now, and there's no evidence of it, but that's where the water came from. So as I said, here you have quite a number of John Wesley's items. This gown here, the way it's displayed gives the impression it's a preaching gown, but it isn't actually a preaching gown, it's an evening gown.
Right.
So men in John Wesley's time, in the evening they would sit down by the fire and they would wear an evening gown. This would protect them from all the drafts that would have been created in the house because of the windows and the fire would have created drafts. Some of the items that are normally in here are upstairs in a temporary exhibition at the moment. But what we have here, we've got the spurs that John Wesley had on his shoes when he was travelling around the country on horseback.
Yeah.
Travelling chest there. And then this item is very interesting here. Because, as I said, John Wesley travelled on horseback around the country. In fact, he travelled something like 250,000 miles during his lifetime. But of course, between November probably, and March, the weather wouldn't be suitable. So he would be based probably in London. And when he was here, he had to keep himself fit, because if you don't, when you're riding a horse, then your joints stiffen up.
Yeah.
So what they used in those days was something called a chamber horse. That's what this is. And the way it works, this isn't an original, so it's a copy. I can show you how it works. You sit on it, and go up and down as if you're riding a horse.
Yeah.
Or you might think of it as being an early indoor gym.
Yeah.
I was about to say the same.
Video, you saw
Yeah.
a teapot.
It's much bigger than.
It is. It's a teapot which can be used for many guests. And this is a teapot that was given to John Wesley by Josiah Wedgwood. And of course Wedgwood pottery is very well known, it's worldwide. wide, isn't it? Now here we've got John Wesley's christening gown.
Right.
So he would have been baptised in that. But of course Susanna had 18 children.
Mm.
And you can imagine that this was probably passed on from one child to the next, each of them being baptised. Because not all the children survived, did they?
Mm.
Yeah. And there the baby's rattle.
Yeah.
And at the bottom of it, that red piece is coral.
Mm.
Coral, yes. And it was used for teething.
Mm.
So this is the dining room.
Yeah.
And this is where John Wesley would have had his meals.
Yeah.
And where he would have received his guests. The tea urn here. Now tea is very interesting in John Wesley's time because John Wesley initially didn't agree with tea.
Mm.
And I think there are two reasons for that. One is that tea was very expensive in those days, and because tea had only recently been introduced into the country, about 50 years previously, at the earliest.
Betul naruh dulu.
So after they've had their meal in there in the evening, they would come in here, and this is known as the back parlour. And they would sit down here and they would chat, all the people who were in the house, and they would probably drink wine and weak beer
Yeah.
as well. Because of course water wasn't drinkable in those times, you had to boil the water to make it drinkable. This is Charles Wesley's bureau or writing desk. This, because Charles Wesley never lived in this house. I mean, he visited it regularly, but he lived quite a bit of the time in Bristol. And if you go to Bristol, you have to go to Charles Street, the street named after him, and there you see the house where he lived.
Right.
When he came to London, he lived in the Marylebone area, and he's actually buried in Marylebone Parish Churchyard.
Mm.
John is buried here, but Charles is in Marylebone Parish Churchyard.
Kamu kan bayi lagi kok. Terlalu lagi.
This is my favourite room. This is John Wesley's study. And you can see it's the full width of the house.
Yeah.
So it's quite big. Large windows, making it quite bright as well.
Mm.
And most of these items in this room are original. So this is John Wesley's study chair. So you can see it's an interesting shape, isn't it? And the reason for that is that you can sit on it either way around.
Yeah.
So if you sit on it like a normal chair, or if you turn around and you straddle it, you put a book on there and you read. And if you want to write, you put your paper on there, there's a pen in here and ink in the wells.
And it could probably be used as a podium to preach.
Yes. Yeah, you could probably, if you're sitting down, you could probably preach on it. Yeah.
John Wesley died.
Yes, we're just going in. He died in this room.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is his bedroom.
Yeah. And this is where he died in his 87th year.
That's a long time to live for that period.
It is a long time to
Yeah.
live that period, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he was in his 88th year when he died. This bed isn't original, but it's a copy of the type of bed that would have existed at the time of John Wesley. And when you go into the museum, you'll see there's a big painting there showing John Wesley on his deathbed. And it shows lots of people gathering around him, his contemporaries. Obviously poetic license is used there because they couldn't have fitted in this room, could they? Not many people would fit in here when he died. Yeah. Because people refer to this as being the powerhouse of Methodism. Because this is where John Wesley came to pray. This is his prayer room. And he came here at 4 o'clock in the morning. And they would say his own prayers here. Then at 5 o'clock he would go across to the chapel, and he would be joined in the chapel by anybody else staying in the house, and any other people who care to join them at 5 o'clock. And they would have the Anglican order of morning prayer, which was called matins. And the story goes on one occasion he went over to the house, expecting to see some of the other people staying here. Went over to the chapel, sorry. And they weren't there. And he said at breakfast, where were you this morning for morning prayer at 5 o'clock? And they said, well, we were talking late into the night, imagine the room downstairs, and we overslept. So that's when John Wesley made a rule that anybody staying in this house must be in bed by 9 in order to be up by 5. And I remember those 5 o'clock prayers when I did a sabbatical in Ghana, in West Africa, and I had his house. John Wesley only really lived on the floor below. This floor was for visiting preachers. So you can imagine that whilst John Wesley was travelling around the country, somebody had to conduct services here. And they would probably stay here and conduct the services. But also, by the time this house was built, there were already a number of other preaching places around London. And this is what we call the Methodist preaching plan. And this
Is this the room for the housekeeper?
No, this is a room for a visiting preacher.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if someone was here taking services around London or in the chapel here, they would probably stay in a room like this. There was an identical house to this on the other side of the courtyard. It's not there now. But that was solely for visiting preachers. Because of course when they became one of John Wesley's preachers, they became itinerant. So they didn't have their own home, they travelled around.
Yeah, triple alone here.
Yeah,
They were evangelists.
Evangelist,
wherever
yeah.
they were sent.
No duvets at that time.
No duvets at that time, no.